I have been modeling for almost 50 years at this point, and frankly, there are a lot of things out there. I kind of wish when I knew when I started this journey of the things that I've garnered over the years. And so here I have a list of technically of 28 things that I have learned in different aspects of building a model railroad layout. So first, under planning, use it for one. Use actual turnouts, or takes your turnouts and copy them, makes some templates and plan it out. These, an actual turnout, things like that, takes a lot more space than you think. If you're just going to create some freehand sketch, you can actually get way too much in and find out your plan doesn't really work. Two, make sure you have adequate aisle widths. We have another video on that. It explores more into that thing. So make sure you don't create things that are too narrow. Too narrow equals two frustrations if you can't, especially if you plan on having multiple people off of your railroad. You need to have room for people to pass and to congregate where necessary. Three, minimize the reach. Really, you should ideally to keep our length. You're not reaching more than about 24 inches or so, maybe 30. No, but really no more than 36. Anything more than that, you're just not going to be able to reach. And you have track work beyond that. You won't be able to see it properly in order to install it properly, which probably means you're going to have, could potentially derailments and things like that. It'll be hard to even address in the future. Four, make sure you build an appropriate layout to the appropriate height. Don't build it if you want it eye level. You can build it eye level. But keep in mind your reach is going to be limited. If you want to build it low and sit around at a chair, that's great. But build it to where you think you're going to be building it. Don't build it accidentally too high or too low. Mainly because again that will make it harder to maintain, or you make it backache. Five, make sure ideally try to use the largest turnout sizes as possible. Don't if you're running long passenger cars, you don't want number fours everywhere. Long passenger cars and long 6-axle engines, really you need to be looking at like number 8s or even larger if they're available. Much as possible, use like 5s and 6s and leave the number 4s for like the industrial areas. And 6, also along with that, use the largest curve radii you can. Frankly, it looks better. Now, some places you can't, sometimes you're limited, but use the less big as you can. So if you can get away, if you have 4 by 4 by 8 foot board, and you can use some 22-inch radius curves, like for instance, like that in NHO. Don't feel I have to use just the 18s. Then number 7, along with the curves, we want to make sure you really want to minimize S curves. This is where the train will curve one way, then curve the other way. You have to make sure that between these S curves, that the distance between the S curves, you get some straight track in between those S curves, and it needs to be just as or longer, ideally longer than the longest piece of equipment that you're using. So basically, if you have like 89-foot auto racks or like that, or passenger cars, you want to make sure that straight track is at least that long. So that way, that piece of equipment has a chance to straighten out completely before bending the opposite direction. Long cars being bent both ways will no doubt either will pull cars off in front and behind it off the track, or will, frankly, just derail. For bench work, I found the easiest way is make sure first is use good wood. There's a lot of tiny places out there you can buy the big box stores of wood, and we've seen the stories where you have to go pick piece by piece, and you've seen some horrible bent stuff. Don't buy that stuff. You might as well. You're better off going to a local lumberyard and paying them a higher price for good straight wood. This wood here generally is, if it's nice and dry, it'll be a joy to cut and drill and work with as you go. Stuff that is too wet or warped like that, it'll just be will be an overall frustration for you. So 8, we also want to make sure that I found an easy use of drywall screws actually works better for a lot of the modeling. I found the nails, and these don't hold very well over time; they tend to get loose. And then I thought that maybe wood screws is best. The problem with wood screws, that requires pilot holes for everything, and wrinkling. You can't even with long enough screws, it's very hard to even drill them by hand where necessary. You always have to use a drill with a screwdriver bit at that point. But drywall screws are enough such a way that you can use a power drill for it, or if you have tight quarters, you can use a screwdriver where necessary. Number 10, really some appropriate tools is always good. I found with the model railroad lab, the most invaluable tool I have is a miter saw, a power miter saw. This really makes short, clean cuts of easy of all my links. I want to make diagonal pieces like that for bracing or for legs. It makes it so much faster than using hand tools. So some sort of drill. It could be corded or cordless, but you want to drill with a good set of drills. Now for track, for like number 11, you do want to make sure that joints are smooth to a fingertip. And this goes along also with number 12 here is test. Take a car, check for joints. Here, you really should be very, very smooth and very, very quiet. If it takes a lot of clunks, stop, and make sure that joint is smooth to a fingertip. Because small model wheels will basically pick up those imperfections. It may look good for the eye, but you would see things like bouncing around are places that will invite derailments in the future. Number 13 is plan for remote turnouts. This may mean you want to drill a hole for that throw rod now. So number 14 is use terminal strips to neaten your wiring. While it's very easy to drop points from A to B and crisscross your wires all over the place, it's much nicer to have them much neater. Terminal strips allow for quick connects and disconnects, and allow for troubleshooting where necessary, or even adding on additional track in wiring in the future. Along with that, for number 15, is use those crimp-on spade connectors. That will again make it easier, make the wire won't slip out of the terminal strips, and again makes it very easy to connect and disconnect without too much trouble. And then with number 16 is you want to make sure you use a good soldering iron. Ideally, you'd want to use something that is variable temperature. So this allows you to use the same tool for potentially working on circuit boards, to track, to wiring. You don't have to worry about accidentally taking it too hot and melting insulation or tie. 17 is make sure that we have adequate feeders to your track. Make sure your feeders are no more than about 5-6 feet apart, and make sure that every rail has a feeder within that range. This way we don't accidentally have some dead spots. If you get into scenery here with number 18, if you're doing any type of scenery work, mask your track off. Don't think, oh yeah, it's quick, I can just do that. I done made that mistake. Because where's that paint or plaster drop going to blop? Right on the finished track work. So make sure you mask first. Then for 19, you're going to paint your track. Paint it before doing any scenery ballasting. It's much easier to do it before you get to that, potentially messing things up. And then for 20, I find it best when you're ballasting. Considering ballasting is really a part of a scenery type thing, not necessarily about a track. Your ballast, the stone ballast goes on top of the dirt, right? The dirt on top of the ballast. So it's best to create your ground cover around your track work and then ballast on top. Number 21 is make sure you kind of go through when you're creating scenery is go in a logical order. So really this means, paint your plywood, foam, whatever, your base, brown first, and then sprinkle on, your dirt, get the dirt down. And then the light ground foam is kind of represents kind of those weeds and lower level grasses. And then put the static grass on top of that. And then bushes and then trees. You're kind of building it up, up in layers. So you don't be afraid if you have some dirt showing through on is very realistic, because not everything is covered in grass or in brambles or in bushes, but make sure you layer your scenery for the most realistic effect. If you're using things like foam, here for number 22, use something like sculpted mold or plaster to fill in the gaps between foam layers. Unless you're doing something like heavy rock works like that, but that's not necessarily all that realistic, because rock isn't necessarily all that regular everywhere. Make sure you fill in those seams, and so that is all well disguised. Otherwise, it can look kind of unsightly for a lot of areas. 3, you may want to consider things using something like foam core, cardboard, especially if you're using some of these roadbed tracks like Cato Unitrack, to help eliminate some of that roadbed profile. Not every area will have this high profile track next to the scenery. A lot of industrial areas, for instance, in yards, are pretty much going to be even across. You may want to put some filler in there, so you don't have to use a ton of ballast to help try to fill in all these spaces. And for buildings in detail, for number 24, we want to try to do is fit your track and your scenery to your buildings, rather than the buildings to the track plan. And this may result in you having to do more maybe potential scratch building or kit bashing to fit your buildings to your buildings to the track. It can actually make it a bit more organic and realistic this way. So, for example, that river was there before you built your bridge. Don't make it look like that the bridge was put in, then the river went in. Then number 25 for buildings, you want to do is when you put your building down, kind of outline the building foundation in pencil, then use it as a guide to scenic up around the edges. So when you replant your building, it looks like it's actually planted in the ground rather than laying on top of the ground. So you don't have any unsightly foundation gaps. For number 26, when you're doing structures, plan for lighting, and then you may not think about doing it now, because sometimes you may want to add a night scene. So this means like painting the inside of structures black to prevent some light leakage through. Add some cardboard view blocks, at least diagonally from corner to corner, so you can't see all the way through a building. Add some Scotch tape on the inside or some frosting on the inside of windows, makes you can't really see through the windows if you don't want detail to be added. You can add subfloors in and other kind of view blocks in order to make so that you can quickly accommodate additional some detail type lighting. For number 27, you want to be able to paint sub-assemblies when you're doing kits. So you may want to build a brick building. You may want to build all your walls, for instance, and then literally paint up, primerize that, and paint all the buildings. Paint all the windows at the same time while they're still on the sprues, for instance. This way that then you quickly can spray all the light colors and then assemble things, and then you can do your final detail painting. Some structures do make it easier for that. It's much harder to do it if you try to paint it all at once, when it's all assembled. Then lastly, for number 28, consider when you're detailing roofs of buildings. Usually most of us, we're looking down on our layouts a lot of places, and frankly, just a bare building with no roof and nothing there, it looks kind of plain. So you could be adding the word prototypical gravel roofs, make sure you add things like, access stairs, the appropriate mounts of vents and chimneys, smokestacks, air conditioner units. And a lot of this can be quickly done with a lot of simple piping or blocks. There are a number of detail parts out there available. A lot of folks out there are doing this for 3D printings. You can go for trade shows and pick up a lot of this stuff through a lot of your fellow modelers and cottage industries. So I'm sure all these things I could come up with about twice as many items here than this 28. But if you have additional ones of issues, things that you had that you want to have that folks wish folks that knew about certain issues, please give me a comment.